Faithfully delivering value, interpreting global literature. Hello, this is Sally's Book Club. Today we're exploring the roots of Romanticism. We often hear this verse: life is precious, love more dear. For freedom's sake, I cast both away. This golden verse originated from a 19th century Hungarian poet championed by literary figures like Lu Xun and Xu Zhimo, becoming widely known in the Chinese-speaking world. But upon reflection, this verse raises questions. Why should freedom and love outweigh life itself? Why must these three be mutually exclusive? Can't one live freely with their beloved? Its charm lies precisely in how it boldly defies conventional wisdom. This counterintuitive stance is what we call Romanticism. Today's book thoroughly analyzes Western Romanticism's origins and its impact on the modern world. Before we begin, let's meet the author. Isaiah Berlin, born in 1909 Russia to a Jewish family, Berlin emigrated to Britain after the Revolution, becoming a renowned 20th century philosopher. His life witnessed Europe's 20th century turbulence and decline. Thus, The Roots of Romanticism offers Berlin's intellectual examination of modern European civilization's ailments. So why focus on Romanticism? Because Berlin saw Romanticism as the watershed that shattered ancient worldviews. Romanticism has become fundamental to how we understand reality. Modern people value inner emotional experiences and respect cultural diversity unlike before. As the saying goes, strike the snake at its vital point. Romanticism is modernity's vital point. Since we're discussing Romanticism, what exactly is it? Regrettably, scholars hold wildly different views. Some celebrate it as an ode to human vitality. Others see the pale-faced maiden as its quintessential image. Some see Romanticism as a disease, the idle moans of poets and Catholic conservatives. But others believe Romanticism is healthy, a cure for spiritual weakness. Then the trouble comes. Views on Romanticism not only differ but conflict with each other. So Berlin suggests that to grasp Romanticism, it's best to see it through historical development, tracing its roots to understand it. Where did it come from? And how did it become what it is today? In this sense, we can see this book as a concise history of Romanticism. All right, without delay, let's dive into this book and explore the origins and evolution of Romanticism with Berlin. According to Berlin, Romanticism's growth from budding to full strength can be said to have three stages. First is the budding stage. Romanticism arose as an opposition to the Enlightenment. In the second stage, Romanticism began emphasizing human freedom, seeing it as essential to being human. Finally, in the third stage, Romanticism grew more radical, shifting from freedom to action, even advocating action for its own sake. Let's start with the budding stage. Berlin thinks that while Romanticism's influence spread globally, its true birthplace was in 18th century Germany. Why is that? First, Germany's poor political state in the 18th century. Compared to powers like Britain and France, Germany's political modernization was much slower. When France was unified and focused on development, Germany was still fragmented, with 300 palaces and 1,200 lords across its territory. So Germany's modernization path lagged behind. Moreover, political fragmentation made German culture too localized, hindering cultural progress. For example, Bach, now world-renowned, was only known around Leipzig in his time. Secondly, Germany was a main center for the Reformation. This movement opposed Catholic ritualism, emphasizing a deep spiritual connection with God. This led German thinkers to prefer exploring inner spiritual worlds. Considering this, Berlin argues Romanticism arose in Germany mainly due to sour grape psychology. That is, since what you want is hard to get, turn it around and think differently. Actually, what we originally pursue isn't that great. Others' grapes are sour too. In Germany, it was the backwardness of the real world that led German thinkers to claim modern European civilization had gone astray. Because they ignored people's inner selves and emotions, and the emphasis on the inner self is precisely what German thinkers excel at. One reason Romanticism arose in Germany is Germans' dissatisfaction with their backward state, triggering psychological compensation. From the perspective of intellectual history, German dissatisfaction manifested specifically as opposition to the Enlightenment, thus beginning the Romantic movement. So, to understand Romanticism, we cannot avoid the Enlightenment. The European Enlightenment was popular in the late 17th century. In the early 18th century, Berlin pointed out that despite involving many figures, Enlightenment thinkers basically shared three beliefs. First, all true questions can be answered. Some questions ordinary folks might not solve, but with learned experts, answers can definitely be found. Conversely, if a question has no solution, it's because the way it's asked is wrong. It's a false problem. Second, the answers to these true questions can certainly be known by humans without relying on gods or other supernatural forces. Theoretically, given enough time to learn all problems in the world, we can know their answers. Third, there are no conflicting correct answers. That is, a question can only have one standard answer, just like in math problems, 1 plus 1 equals 2, and can only equal 2. From these three beliefs, it can be seen that Enlightenment thinkers viewed the entire world as a machine, like a Swiss watch, designed precisely and operating regularly. It's particularly important to note that this understanding applies not only to nature, but also to human, social, and ethical life. They believed that since natural science problems all have standard answers, human ethical life, especially how humans achieve happiness, is no exception. Then what Enlightenment thinkers would do next is simple. Just as scientists seek the laws of nature and use that knowledge to develop technology and transform nature, similarly, Enlightenment thinkers envisioned that by finding the laws of human society, they could use this knowledge to change the human world and bring happiness to humanity. Just as Enlightenment thought was becoming mainstream in Europe, opposition emerged from Germany, a fascinating phenomenon. Most French Enlightenment thinkers were wealthy elites. Montesquieu, Diderot, Voltaire frequented high society salons and traveled abroad to broaden horizons. Contrast, the German thinkers we'll discuss mostly came from humble, non-noble backgrounds. And so when they saw French nobles preaching equality, it felt utterly hypocritical and insincere. Against this backdrop, German anti-Enlightenment figures stepped forward. First was Hamann. Though not renowned in his lifetime, he came from a modest background. His father was a bathhouse attendant, mostly remembered only for his frequent debates with Kant. But Berline argues Hamann profoundly influenced later German thought. All elements of Romanticism trace their roots back to Hamann. A man believed life's goal isn't cheap little pleasures, but fully expressing one's talents. Like when reading a book, we want to see its uniqueness, not cliches. Thus, universal laws prized by Enlightenment thinkers are far less meaningful than individual events. Moreover, once human life is governed by universal laws and rigidly categorized, happiness vanishes and tyranny descends. In short, though, Hammond's writing was obscure. He consistently emphasized human uniqueness and self-expression. This launched the first wave of opposition against Enlightenment thought. Another German thinker, Herder, further developed Hammond's stance. In Berlin's view, Herder is the true father of Romanticism. Herder was Prussian, living under Frederick the Great's rule. Enlightenment thinkers saw this monarch as ideal, yet serving under him, governing by Enlightenment principles, Herder felt increasingly stifled, fueling his aversion. Overall, Herder had three key propositions. First, he believed humans are creatures that must speak because we always have emotions to convey. In other words, expression is a fundamental trait of being human. For example, if someone can't convey emotions and thoughts to others, they might be considered autistic and in human terms, incomplete. Extending this, cultural phenomena like literature and art don't aim to reflect objective laws, but to fulfill creators' expressive desires. Creators use this to communicate with others. Building on this, the second view, Herder believed all human cultures have uniqueness. No absolutely universal culture exists. Since every culture expresses its creators, it inevitably bears their imprint, like each region having its own dialect. Even when speaking standard Mandarin, people carry accents from their hometowns. He even believed appreciating a civilization requires immersing oneself in its context. We could say ancient Greek pottery patterns are beautiful, and Chinese porcelain is equally stunning. But these beauties are entirely different. To appreciate Greek art, one must read Homer's epics and understand their city-states and lifestyles. Finally, Herder argued that since cultures differ, people under each pursue different ideals. No universally desired ideal exists. We all live in specific times and places. You can't simultaneously be Eastern and Western. Just every nation should strive to preserve its traditions and maintain its unique character. Um, Herder's three propositions not only countered the Enlightenment, but also affirmed human civilization's richness. So far, we've seen Romanticism emerged as a backlash against Enlightenment thought. But how did it intensify into a major movement? Berlin notes two crucial thinkers fueled this, Kant and Schiller. These two propelled Romanticism into its second stage. At this stage, Romanticism moved beyond merely opposing Enlightenment ideas. It began focusing on human freedom. Next, let's explore how Kant and Schiller achieved this. Immanuel Kant is arguably Germany's most famous philosopher. He lived in the same small town as the previously mentioned Hamann, and the two often engaged in written debates. Kant's life was as rigorous and somewhat dull as his intellectual style. Logically, he should be incompatible with passionate romanticism. But why does Berlin think he propelled the Romantic movement? The key lies in Kant's strong emphasis on human freedom. Kant believed that to judge whether an action is moral, one must base it on, extremely put, the motive behind doing it, meaning good intentions leading to bad outcomes, is even more moral than bad intentions leading to good outcomes, because the final outcome of a matter can be interfered with by many external factors which we can hardly control. What we truly can control is the inner motive to do good. It is precisely in this context that Kant believed humans are not bound by external constraints, truly manifesting free will. We all know Kant's famous saying, there are two things. The more often and persistently we reflect on them, the more our hearts fill with ever-increasing admiration and awe. The starry heavens above me and the moral law within me. What does this mean? Human dignity lies in free will, and when exercising this will to do good, it can even rival the brilliance of the starry sky. And Schiller took this theme from Kant and developed it most vividly. And Friedrich Schiller was both a thinker and a brilliant playwright. So his dramatic theory is precisely the essence of his doctrine. The traditional view holds that tragedy demonstrates lessons to the world by portraying suffering. If we could behave virtuously, keep our hearts pure, and follow certain rules, the terrible consequences seen in tragedies wouldn't occur. That Schiller said that tragedy truly embodies human resistance against inevitable laws. The protagonists in tragedies suffer various misfortunes, but it is precisely because they endure such torment that they are called heroes, and it manifests the brilliance of human will. For example, there's an ancient Greek tragedy called Medea, where the protagonist, Medea, to avenge her husband's betrayal, kills her own children and then leaves. Although morally speaking, Medea isn't a good person, Schiller considered her a true hero because Medea was able to overcome her nature and her love for her children to take action. In other words, Medea is a character who could conquer natural laws, whereas those who are inactive and only follow external rules are worthless and superfluous. However, from this view, humans can never reconcile with external constraints and will always live in tension. So, how do we achieve liberation? This brings us to Schiller's second important point. That is to live like in a game, thereby liberating our nature. When children play, even with rules, they improvise them themselves, so they feel no pressure. Similarly, the ideal state of human life is to freely create rules and then passionately follow them. According to Schiller, an ideal life is itself a work of art, blending rules and freedom. All right, let's summarize together. Through these two thinkers, Romanticism added new content, placing human freedom at the highest level. Berlin believes this was the first time in Western intellectual history that human ideals were returned to humanity itself. Ideals aren't provided by science or religion, but created by human will. Notably, at this stage, Romanticism highly valued free will, but still had constraints from morality or art. The Berlin says Romanticism became more radical, even denying the inherent nature of things to highlight human will. So, what drove this? Berlin summarized three factors: the German philosopher Fichte, the French Revolution, and the great German writer Goethe. Let's look at each one. Fichte was an admirer of Kant and deeply grasped his scholarship's essence. It said Fichte once published an anonymous article everyone thought was Kant's, forcing Kant to personally deny it. Nevertheless, Fichte didn't just copy Kant's ideas, but deepened, or more appropriately, radicalized them. We just mentioned Kant highly valued human freedom. Fichte strongly agreed with this. However, he further argued that to exercise free will, one shouldn't just rely on moral rules, but actively act, becoming the source of value for the world. Fichte's view implies the world gains meaning only through humans. For example, food becomes food only when humans feel hungry and need to eat. Nature itself has no such thing as food. In this sense, humans become masters of the world. Conversely, to make the world valuable, humans must constantly act and create tirelessly to fulfill life. Fichte presented this image: human life is like flowing water, constantly moving without fixed form, propelled by human will. This gave Romanticism a new feature: passionate exuberance without fixed pursuit. Now consider the French Revolution's impact. German thinkers like Hegel, Fichte, and Schelling witnessed its trajectory from liberty, equal fraternity, to the terror's guillotines. Enlightenment political ideals ended with Napoleon's dictatorship. Germans asked, why did the revolution ultimately fail? The answer: human society is like an iceberg. What we observe is only a small part. Beneath lies immense unseen ice. Enlightenment thinkers, using such limited material to design plans changing all human society, was delusional. Reality harshly punished this. Here, Romanticism added new content: belief in an invisible yet powerful force governing human destiny. Meaning, we moderns are so intelligent and virtuous. When things don't go well, this hidden force must be interfering. And no matter how hard we try, we can't comprehend this invisible enemy. The decadence and powerlessness in Romantic literature originate here. The third element is German writer Goethe's literary works. Ironically, labeling Goethe a Romantic would have displeased him. He frequently condemned Romanticism as pathological. Similarly, Romantics often resented Goethe's moralizing as representing outdated ethics. Ironically, some of Goethe's literary works are highly praised by Romantics, with Wilhelm Meister being the most important. It's a novel divided into Wilhelm Meister's apprenticeship and Wilhelm Meister's journeyman years. In this novel, Goethe beautifully depicts how young Wilhelm Meister learns, travels, and ultimately becomes a well-rounded individual. The Romantics admire him mainly for two reasons. First, he portrays a youth who, through free will, overcomes external limitations to become a genius. This process embodies the Romantic ideal of life, as it resembles the creation of a genius artist, but the subject is human life itself. Second, Goethe's writing flows freely, switching between styles, sometimes plain essays, lyrical poetry, or refined prose. This effortless form shifting deeply fascinates romantics. They believe art should function exactly like this. By liberating definitive statement, romanticism gains its true core. That is, it advocates for unrestrained free will and asserts that there are no fixed rules in the world. If there are, we must strive to break them. The passion and madness on the 20th century historical stage can all be traced back to this root. Having understood the roots of Romanticism, let's explore its impact. First, let's look at the artistic aspect. When Romanticism is mentioned, we most easily think of music, art, and so on. Next, let's give examples. Before the Romantic movement, people appreciated music more for its lyrics. Because musical notes are abstract, invisible, and intangible, they weren't considered very valuable. For example, many now love Bach's Essence, but in his time, he was merely a somewhat famous musical craftsman because his work was composing, not writing lyrics. But after Romanticism became popular, things changed. People began to see abstract musical notes as the essence of music because it expresses the human soul, embodying human will and passion. So when we think of a romantic musician like Beethoven, the image that comes to mind is disheveled hair, intense eyes, unsophisticated, not associating him with polyness and rational calm. Cake painting, for example, before Romanticism, artists were expected to precisely imitate subjects, ideally acting as mirrors to flawlessly replicate nature. But after Romanticism, people emphasized the artist's subjective experience. Good art wasn't about realism, but conveying personal perception and authentic emotion. That's why, since Impressionism, modern painting has grown increasingly abstract. Yet Romanticism's influence extends beyond art to how we view politics and society. During the Enlightenment, a contractual view of the state prevailed in intellectual circles. That is, individuals were atomic entities who formed states through social contracts. Thus, humans could transform communities by rationally changing laws. But German Romantics argued states aren't designed, they're living organisms with deep histories, mysteriously guided by an inner destiny. This birthed the historical school of law in Germany, emphasizing traditions, rationality, and political caution. Finally, Romanticism profoundly impacted intellectual history. Berlin identifies three significant intellectual descendants: existentialism, fascism, and liberalism. First, existentialism inherited Romanticism's sincerity, emphasis, diverging from knowledge as virtue. This tradition holds self-honesty as the primary virtue. Life shouldn't pursue cold truths. Nothing's reliably fixed. Salvation comes only from within. Second, fascism embraced Romanticism's radical side. It negated all fixed systems, using aesthetic ideals to reshape politics, even worshiping leaders like artistic geniuses. Lastly, liberalism adopted Romanticism's recognition of pluralistic values. Liberalism abandoned absolute truths, embracing tolerance for diverse beliefs while accepting life's imperfections, since perfectionism destroys living. Having covered these influences, you might ask, what special insights does Romanticism offer for our lives today? This era where computer algorithms, machinery, and intelligent technologies increasingly invade daily life, humans have become slaves to rational laws, creating a society of monotonous conformity. In this context, revisiting the Romantics' teachings would be profoundly beneficial, because Romanticism's core celebrates life's diversity, never yielding to cold rules, while life's meaning awaits our own discovery and creation. Only then can we achieve true freedom. All right, that concludes our exploration of Romanticism's roots. The reading notes are below the audio. We'll meet again tomorrow.